But it's really terrific to see everyone here. My name is Philip Bryden, and I'm the Dean of Law, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this year's annual Merv Leitch QC Memorial Lecture that's going to be delivered by Andrew Coyne. I'd like to give a special welcome to the members of the Leech family and their guests, and to take the opportunity to congratulate the winners of the Merv Leitch QC Scholarship in Law, Stephen Archibald and Shaughnessy Hill, and the winners of the Merv Leitch QC Prize in Law, Brett Colvin and Sean Wallace. Yes, please congratulate them. Before we introduce our speaker, I would like to say a very few words about the remarkable individual in whose honor this lecture was established, the Honorable Merv Leitch QC. Mr. Leach was born into a farming family in a small town called Creelman, Saskatchewan in 1926. It was a difficult time as a result of drought and locust plagues and the Depression. The family had to move several times and ended up in southern Alberta. As a result of the difficult experiences that his family underwent, he had to leave school in grade 8 to help support his family. And he joined the Navy in World War II and served in the North Atlantic, and when he was discharged, he had an opportunity to come to university, but first, of course, he had to get through high school. And so he did grades 9, 10, 11, and 12 in one summer, and then came to the University of Alberta, initially studying agriculture and then moving into a joint degree in arts and law. And he graduated with a BA in 1951 and with an LLB in 1952, winning the gold medal in law. And I should say that winning the gold medal in the class of 1952 was no mean feat. Among Mr. Leach's distinguished classmates were Peter Lougheed, who went on to become, most people would acknowledge, Canada's greatest premier. Ivan Head, who had an extraordinarily distinguished academic career and was principal secretary to Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. And Ken Moore, who became Chief Justice of the Alberta Court of Queen's Bench, and a number of other very distinguished graduates from that amazing class. After he graduated, Mr. Leach joined the McLeod-Dixon firm in Calgary and had a very successful career as a trial lawyer. He was president of the Calgary Bar Association, a bencher of the Law Society of Alberta, and then in 1971 he went into politics. And until he left political life in 1982, he held a number of key cabinet portfolios in Mr. Lougheed's government, including Attorney General, Provincial Treasurer, and Minister of Natural Resources. He returned to McLeod-Dixon in 1982 and practiced there until his untimely death from cancer in 1990. And I'd now like to invite Mr. Leach's son, Jim, to say a few words about the creation of the endowment that supports this lecture series and the scholarships and awards that I mentioned earlier. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Phil. It's wonderful to see so many people here and many friends. I have some colleagues from the office, some colleagues from my father's time in public life, some old friends. And Andrew, like I said upstairs, they didn't come to hear me, so I won't take very long. But and on behalf of our family, I did want to say a few brief words about the genesis of the scholarships and the lecture series and Premier Lougheed's role in it. Now, these both started, of course, after he left office in 1985. And the use of post-departure honorifics is more an American tradition than a Canadian or Commonwealth one, but since our family has a bit of American blood in us through our dad's mom, I'm going to go with that. And apologies to Andrew, you heard part of this last night, and you're going to hear it again tomorrow in Calgary, but since I have to hear you twice, I figure that's a decent trade. And I asked the Dean and the Dean in Calgary to allow me to do this because it is just over 1 year, of course, since Premier Lougheed passed away. And the Dean has very nicely described the members of that class of 52. A couple of people that he didn't mention, though, one of whom, if you go up and see that picture, is there were 2 women in that class, among the 15th and 20th or so graduates from this law school. One of those being our mother, Joyce Morris, and therefore we have a lot to owe the U of A Law School for. So we thank you. And speaking of thank yous, we have received many thank yous over the years, very generous and kind ones from the scholarship winners. You'll notice they're down here, all 3 of them today, similarly dressed. I see that there must be a uniform for excellence around here of light blue on the top and dark on the bottom. So, well done. And in some of those, they've thanked us for our generosity. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to sort of clarify this. This lecture series and the scholarships related to it, of course, bear our father's name, but they exist because of Premier Lougheed and the friends and the colleagues of his and our dad that he gathered to do so. The endowment that was created for it, is the only significant non-political fundraising that I am aware of that Premier Lougheed undertook to that time, if ever. So that is special to us. And an homage is the nature of thanks, but as the Calgary Dean of Law said in thanking Mr. Lougheed, who gave the inaugural lecture there in 1991, what do you give a man with a mountain in the family? It's also a recognition, and Mr. Lougheed's public accomplishments, I think, are well known to many, and I will not attempt to relate them here because Andrew needs some time for what he's going to tell us, and I want to hear that too. The recognition I want to give is more of a private nature to tell you sort of why this thing came about. Mr. Lougheed had a rare ability. It was not unique, since there have been a few others and still a few amongst our family friends, one of whom is with us today, who could manage it. Not very many. And that was the ability to make, I use that word advisedly, our dad admit out loud that he might have done 1 or 2 things well in his life. And that would not have occurred on the first or second try. Flowing from that to convince him to the end of his life that he was worthy of an honor, such as this lecture and the scholarships in his name, was an achievement of Mr. Lougheed's. I'd like to think that Mr. Lougheed got exasperated at some point in this exercise and pulled the Humphrey Bogart from Maltese Falcon and said something like, "Leech, when you're honored, you'll take it and like it." So to our recipients in particular, but to all, if you're going to direct your thanks to anyone, after your families, your partners, your friends, and all who support you, including the people in the law schools, you can thank the late Peter Lougheed. But we will, however, accept his thanks on his and our family's behalf. I have one more thing to say, since we are honoring remarkable people. A little over a year ago, I read a poignant column by our speaker about his father, who had then just passed away. And I am ashamed to admit I did not know the story or the remarkable history of James Coyne, who was the 2nd governor of the Bank of Canada from 1955 to 61, until I read that column, which I recommend to you. But from one family to another, who shared a parent, with the public, to the latter's, we think, considerable benefit, I offer our belated condolences, our thanks for his service, and our thanks to you for being the Leech lecturer.
Thank you, Jim, for those words. I'd like now to give a very brief introduction to our speaker, Andrew Coyne. He's well known, I think, to all of us as a journalist and a political commentator with Postmedia News. He has degrees from the University of Toronto and the London School of Economics. And in addition to the National Post, he's written for many great newspapers and magazines, both in Canada and the United States, including the Globe and Mail, Maclean's, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Time Magazine. He's the winner of 2 National Newspaper Awards and the Hyman Solomon Award for Excellence in Public Policy Journalism. He has appeared frequently as a political commentator on radio and television, and his topic today is one that could hardly be more timely. It is the alarming state of Canada's democracy. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Coyne.
Well, thank you very much, Dean Bryden, and thank you, members of the Leech family, for your kindness and your hospitality. I want to say, first of all, that I'm fully conscious of the honor that you do me by asking me to give this address and of the responsibility that goes with it to do honor to the memory of Merv Leitch. I didn't have the pleasure of meeting the man, but he was, by all accounts, a remarkable, indeed a towering figure, not only as a lawyer and political leader, but as a man, with those qualities of humility, selflessness, duty, and concern for others that was so typical of his generation. I'll do my best to fulfill that responsibility. One of the trials of writing for a newspaper, and there are very few, is that you do not typically get to write your own headlines. The column might be an incisive, even groundbreaking dissertation on the problems of the Canadian healthcare system, but if an editor slaps "Predators from Mars ate my baby" on top of it, you got to go with it. In the present case, things worked out very differently. Not only was I allowed to choose the title of this lecture, the organizers insisted on it. "Can you just give us a heading for your speech?" they inquired about 6 months ago. "Oh, God, I don't know," I said, without giving it much thought. "What about the alarming state of Canadian democracy?" I was mostly just trying to get them to go away, but as I thought about it afterward, the title seemed to me more and more apropos, and particularly that word, alarming. I might, after all, have said the depressing state of Canadian democracy, or the degenerate state of Canadian democracy, or even the faintly ludicrous state of Canadian democracy. But I think alarming gets at the point I want to make nicely, because I think we have tripped some sort of wire in recent years. It is alarming, and if we're not alarmed, we bloody well ought to be. Put plainly, we no longer live under the system we think we do. We have the form of a parliamentary democracy, but not the substance. No, we have not become a tyranny. We do not fear the midnight knock upon our door. But if government is not wholly our master in this country, neither can it be said to be really our servant. We have not become a dictatorship, but we are no longer quite a democracy either, not in any meaningful sense. No democracy is perfect. People in every country complain about the faults in theirs, but somewhere along the way, I believe ours crossed the line. Democracy, real democracy, is slipping away from us. Not irrevocably, I hope, but it's only a hope. Some of the problems with our system are long-standing and well-known. Others are of more recent vintage. And while any one of them on its own might not trouble us unduly, their accumulated weight should, not least because each new abuse, each further assault, only weakens our defenses for the next. The failings are profound and across the board, from the conduct of our elections to how we count the votes to the way that Parliament works or doesn't work. We should beware, of course, of falsely idealizing how politics used to be in this country, but we should equally steer clear of the lazy assumption that it's always been this way. It hasn't. It's worse now in material ways, markedly worse. This is not a commentary on recent political controversies, for the most part, or an indictment of any one party. The dismantling of Canadian democracy is a glittering bipartisan achievement. And while I will spend most of my time talking about the federal domain, much of what follows applies equally to provincial politics. I'll even venture to guess that some of it might apply in Alberta. So allow me, if you will, to raise the alarm at the state of our democracy. Let's start, I'm going to mix metaphors here, with the canary in the mine shaft, voter turnout. Turnout has been declining in this country for more than 20 years. In the 16 federal elections from 1945 to 1993, turnout averaged nearly 75%. In the 6 elections since then, it has averaged just 62%. That's of registered voters, that is, of the names Elections Canada maintains on its permanent voter list. Throw in those who registered on election day or those who never registered at all, and the reality is that barely half the voting age population casts their ballot. We can't be sure of the reasons for this, of course, and other countries have also experienced declines in turnout. But if I had to speculate on the reasons, well, I wonder. When the prospective voter looks at the candidates in his or her riding, what does he see? He sees creatures of the parties, their nominations having been secured either by busloads of instant members or else by being parachuted in at the behest of the party leader, but in either case dependent utterly on the approval of the leader, who is required by law to sign his nomination papers before he can run. Perhaps the voter is interested in questions of policy, but it doesn't really matter what the candidates stand for because all policy is set by the parties, and it doesn't matter what the parties stand for because at any given time they generally stand for the same thing, and because whatever they stand for today, they'll stand for its opposite tomorrow. When the voter watches the election campaign, what does he see? He sees campaigns dominated by attack ads, photo ops, attack ads, and news coverage heavily focused on polls, gaffes, and inside baseball strategizing, often about attack ads. Then the votes are counted, and what does the voter see? He sees a parliament that looks nothing like what the voters cast their ballots for, with a number and distribution of seats between the parties bearing no resemblance to the division of opinion in the country. He sees that the MP he elects has no real role or responsibility but to stand up and sit down when told. He sees a parliament that collectively has very little ability to hold governments to account. The conventions that once used to govern such things haven't fallen by the way one by one over the years. He sees that all power effectively resides in the office of the Prime Minister. In recent years, he's seen parties and leaders not only go back on their word or abandon their convictions, but break their own laws. He's seen MPs being offered government jobs to cross the floor, and governments refusing to acknowledge confidence votes or proroguing Parliament rather than face one, or defying express orders of Parliament to surrender documents. And every day, he sees a politics dominated by coarseness, cynicism, name-calling, and mindless partisanship, a viciousness made all the more stupefying for the absence of any real divisions among the parties. If politics generally can be defined as people behaving badly for good reasons, our politics involves people behaving appallingly for no reason at all. And you ask, why doesn't he vote? Frankly, the only mystery in all this is why so many people still do. Elections about nothing, parties reduced to leadership cults, the impotence of ordinary MPs, the irrelevance of Parliament, the near dictatorial powers of the Prime Minister. If we were writing about a third world country with a system like ours, we would be careful, we media types, to refer to its, quote, largely ceremonial Parliament and, quote, sham elections. Only force of habit prevents us from applying the same terms here. Do I exaggerate? Let's go into some of these issues in more detail, starting with election campaigns. And let's start with the issue that more than any other comes up in surveys as the reason people don't vote. Trust, or to give it its proper name, lies. Politics has never been noted as a place for unsparing honesty. At best, it consists of telling people what they want to hear. It deals in shades of truth, selective facts, exaggeration, blarney, and spin. But in most places, at most times, it has been expected that politicians will stay within some sort of limits. If you wish to deceive, do so by the sly omission, the evasive answer, the non-denial denial. Equivocate if you can, mislead if you must, but don't say straight up, without room for ambiguity, in a manner that's intended to be believed, something that you know is false. But somewhere along the way, that taboo was broken in Canada, and nowhere more so than in that most fundamental unit of democratic currency, the campaign promise. Perhaps it began with Pierre Trudeau, who campaigned furiously against wage and price controls in the 1974 election, only to introduce them shortly thereafter. There followed Brian Mulrooney, who unctuously upbraided John Turner for his patronage sins, as if he were not himself about to take the practice to new depths, or new heights, depending on your point of view. Jean Chrétien, who promised to abolish the GST and renegotiate NAFTA, but did neither. Stephen Harper, who, having promised he would appoint no one who was not elected to either cabinet or the Senate on his first day as Prime Minister, appointed his unelected Quebec organizer, Michael Fortier, to both. A pattern that was to be repeated in everything from fixed election dates to the taxation of income trusts to. This is hardly reserved to federal politics. The list of Dalton McGuinty's broken promises would fill a scrapbook. The former Liberal Premier of New Brunswick, Sean Graham, elected on a promise not to sell New Brunswick Power, proposed to do just that once safely elected. The former Premier of Nova Scotia, New Democrat Darrell Dexter, came to power promising he would neither raise taxes, cut spending, nor run a deficit. He proceeded to do all three. I need hardly dwell on British Columbia's Gordon Campbell and his disavowal prior to the 2009 election of any intent to harmonize the province's sales tax with the federal GST. These were not, it must be stressed, casual slips of the lip, minor items at the bottom of each party's wish list. These were central planks in their platforms, often the major point of divergence between them and their opponents, in some cases arguably the key to their victory. It matters not that all of the gentlemen I named are no longer with us, politically speaking. It's not an answer to say you can throw the bums out the next election when the question of who said what 4 years before would have to contend with 40 other issues. The public should not have to choose between honest government and health care. It should be a given. In any case, the problem is not so much that liars are prospering as that honest politicians have no way of establishing their bona fides anymore. So discredited is the profession generally that everyone is disbelieved equally. This is not politics as usual. It's something worse. It's not just corrosive of public trust. It makes it impossible for the public to base their vote on anything. How can the public assess even the general direction the candidates would take if they can have no confidence in any particular piece of evidence offered to that effect? A second related issue, almost certain to depress turnout, indeed calculated to do so, is attack ads. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with politicians criticizing one another, going negative in the vernacular. But it matters how you go about it, whether your aim is to engage the public or inflame them. Those in the game offer two standard defenses for attack ads. One, the other guys started it. So many people in politics have the moral universe of a 9-year-old. This is invariably true. Whatever sin one party may have committed, it can always find a precedent in its opponents, which is handy since it means neither side need justify its actions in its own right, but only by way of the others. And the second justification, simple. They work. This is presented not as an amusing irony, a commentary on man's fallen nature, but as a moral justification. Oh, they work, you say. Well, in that case, I withdraw all my objections. So often has this been repeated that it's become accepted wisdom. Say what you will about attack ads, my fellow pundits will observe ruefully, but they work. Really? Then why do they have to keep making new ones? Elections generally have losers as well as winners. Somebody's ads must not be working. In fact, most of them don't. Political parties come up with dozens of ads in the course of a campaign. Some work, most fail. Sometimes they even backfire, seen by the public as so over the top that they redound against their sponsors rather than their intended target. There's a case to be made against attack ads, but it isn't that they inevitably tilt the field in favor of one party or another. It's rather that they pollute debate and coarsen the culture. As I say, politics inevitably involves some mutual criticism, but tone matters, as does truth. Truth not merely in the sense of literal factual correctness, but fairness, proportion, and context. What's objectionable about attack ads is not that they're negative, but that they're corrosive. Their intent is not merely to criticize, but to inflame. They're not trying to provoke thought, but to shut it down. The result is not merely to damage one party or the other. The whole profession is degraded to the point that people tune out of politics altogether. The comparison has been made many times. If the airlines ran attack ads savaging each other's safety records, nobody would fly on any of them. Indeed, politics looks very much like an industry in decline. The figures are stark. Not only has the market for politics overall been dwindling, but so, more strikingly, is the share of the market controlled by its leading players. A generation ago, the winning party in an election, conservative or liberal, could consistently persuade 30% or more of the voting age population to come out to vote for it. In recent elections, that has fallen to 22 or 23%. That's our democratic mandate these days. If any normal industry were experiencing this sort of catastrophic decline, they'd be turning themselves inside out, trying to figure out what they were doing wrong. Only in politics would such a galloping disaster be treated as business as usual. Of course, these days, the attacks as often as not are delivered not to the mainstream media, sadly, but where they can be viewed, assessed, and criticized. They're delivered rather through targeted micromedia, notably the infamous robocalls. I have no wish to rehearse here the scandal over those overtly misleading and illegal robocalls, which everyone rightly denounces. I'm talking about the perfectly legal, perfectly respectable robocalls on which every campaign has come to rely. We tend to believe such mass phone operations involving literally millions of calls, legal, ethical, and strategic as they may be, are perfectly normal, something we should take for granted. But in fact, it's all highly abnormal. The phoning, the targeting, the voter identification, all of it. You're perhaps familiar with the phenomenon by which the electorate is sliced and diced into ever more narrowly defined demographic groups, composites of age, sex, race, class, marital status, location, and so on, with cutesy names like Zoe or Dougie assigned to represent them. By the way, I recommend Susan Delacourt's important new book on this, Shopping for Voters. What you may not be aware of is how information on individual voters, that would be you, is increasingly being compiled and collated into personal profiles far beyond your name and phone number. Robocalls aren't simply another medium of broadcasting. They're precisely targeted narrowcasts, and these days the target is you. The party calling knows who you are, which party you support, and what sorts of issues people like you are concerned about. And in the intimacy of that phone call can tell you exactly what you want to hear without concern for how the same message might resonate with other voters. What the mass media of the 20th century took away from the parties, the ability to say one thing to one group of voters and another to another, sometimes contradicting each other, the micromedia of the 21st century has restored. As I say, we've all grown used to this, conditioned to think of it as part of the political game. Reporters write admiring profiles of the strategists behind the campaigns who modestly boast of their prowess at moving the numbers. The voting public are invariably described in such logistical terms as if we were so many packages to be delivered. I get why the parties think this way. I don't get why the rest of us should, why we should consent to being treated in this condescending, manipulative way. Not because of the potential for abuse, but because it is abuse. Of course, it's not all darkness and rain in the modern campaign. There are always those signature events, the televised leaders' debates. There is something ridiculous and just a little bit disturbing about deciding an election not even on the basis of what was learned in the brief chaos of a 5-week campaign, but purely on the strength of who won or lost on a single night as determined by those peerless arbiters, the media. We're electing a government, not a high school debating champion. Don't get me wrong. Debates can be valuable opportunities to compare and contrast the leaders and their platforms. Each of the leaders gets the chance to probe the other's weaknesses, while the public is granted an extended period of close-up scrutiny of the candidates in a spontaneous setting. But that's a very different thing than what the debates have become, which is simply a prize fight. Worse, the format the networks have adopted over the years seems contrived to obscure whatever faint hope there might have been of any insight emerging from these affairs. The candidates are encouraged to shout over each other, to go toe-to-toe, to mix it up, in hopes of that holy grail of media moments, the knockout blow. Of course, after every single debate, the first thing that gets filed on somebody's copy, until everyone mocks them for it, is no knockout blows, which, as Rick Salutin once said, means no usable clips. This feeds the media's appetite for conflict and its addiction to narrative. It has no other use. 5 leaders, 4 subjects, 3 pundits, and a moderator shouting out over each other for minutes on end. Why have the debates so full of promise become such wastes of time? Partly because we've left the design of them to the last minute, ad hoc negotiations between the networks and the parties, vested interests, all of them. The party ahead in the polls wants to have none. The party behind the polls wants to have 6. They saw it off at 1, or rather 1 in each language. This curious linguistic segregation, observed nowhere else in our national politics, in practice means 1 debate for the rest of the country and one whose sole focus is Quebec. So we have a debate about which party will or will not finance the Champlain Bridge, for example. The leaders know that hardly any English speakers tune in the French debate and vice versa. They thus have greater latitude to say one thing in English and another slightly different in French. We're used to simultaneous translation in this country. Why on earth do we put up with this? I alluded to the media's role in this fiasco, and I'd be remiss if I did not dwell on that for a bit, because we make an invaluable contribution to running virtually every election into the ground. Politicians learn from their mistakes. Sometimes we just go on repeating ours. We can't help ourselves. After every election, we retire defeated to our newsroom postmortems, and each time we vow, never again. Never again will we sit up and beg for our Gainsburgers, the little meaningless morsels of news the parties dole out each day to keep us complicit in their charades. Never again will we chase after every fleeting poll, salivate over every minor gaffe. Never again the gotcha question, the silly photo op, the constant search for defining moments, the investing of trivial campaign mishaps with metaphoric import. You know, the bus gets lost, and the next day the copy is, in what some were calling a metaphor for a failing campaign. And then we go out and we do it all over again. I don't know whether it's learned behavior or whether it's instinctive, responding to some deeply recessed part of the journalistic brain. I only know that we are hurting democracy. We aren't just missing an opportunity to help the public make sense of things at a critical time. We're making things worse. We're actually getting in the way. The question most readers, most voters, I submit, would like answered in the course of any campaign, or the two questions are, who are these people and what are they going to do to us? What, instead, do we tell them? We tell them who's ahead, over and over and over, and of course, who's behind. And when we get one or another of the latter group on TV, we ask them why they're behind, over and over and over, apparently in the hope that if we keep asking them long enough, we might make them cry. We speculate on whether the ones who are ahead can stay ahead or whether they have peaked too soon, and whatever space we have left over, we devote to the strategists. Read the coverage of an election in any major daily on any given day. Watch the television. It's not about the election. It's about the campaign. Who's ahead, the minutiae of the day's staged events, and above all, the strategy and tactics. Among other ills, this requires us to give over acres of space and time to the deep thoughts of one or another of the many thousands of smirking strategists with which this country is apparently endowed. Because in his secret heart of hearts, that's who the journalist wishes he was. One of the players, the boys in the room. We write about the horse race, the polls, and the strategy, not because it matters to our readers, but because it matters to the pros, the people we cover, the people we idolize. We parrot their language even as we absorb their values. The latest campaign ad is analyzed from any number of angles. Will it work? Is it on message? What will it mean for the brand? Except the most obvious, is it true? But even if we had the most perfect election campaigns imaginable, we would still have to reckon with the carnage wreaked by our antiquated, unrepresentative, divisive electoral system. First past the post, where the plurality, not the majority, wins. I could spend a whole speech or two, I promise you, on its defects, but just a very quick recap here. Every election throws up fresh anomalies from the system. For example, in 2006, the NDP with 2.6 million votes got 29 seats. The Bloc Québécois with 1.6 million got 51 seats. The Greens with more than 650,000 votes got 0 seats. Liberals in the West, Tories in Vancouver and Toronto, Federalists in Quebec, all greatly underrepresented, distorting our perception of the country and needlessly aggravating regional tensions. Combine that with the vast disparities in the numbers of voters per riding, between Alberta and PEI, for example, and it takes as many votes to elect one Tory MP in some Alberta ridings as it takes to elect 5 Liberal MPs in PEI and Labrador. A system in which one person's vote is worth 3 times, or 4 times, or 5 times another, depending on which party they vote for or which riding they live in, is only approximately democratic. Indeed, for most voters, their votes are effectively worth nothing at all. If you vote for anyone but the winning candidate in our system, that would be 50.7% of the voters in the last exercise, you are effectively denied representation. In a multi-candidate riding, the winner might romp home with the support of 30% of the voters. That same trend is then aggregated over all of the ridings to produce majority governments with the support of less than 40% of the vote, who then claim 100% of the power. Worse, voters are put in the invidious position of having to vote not for the candidate they prefer, but for some other candidate in order to prevent yet a third candidate from winning. The fundamental promise of democracy is one person, one vote. Everyone gets one vote, and every vote is equal. That is simply not the case in Canada today, and may explain in part why so many Canadians refuse to indulge in the charade. But the worst effect of first past the post isn't felt on election day, but every day in between. It's the incentives it creates for certain types of political behaviors that are its most lasting indictment. The most important thing to know about first past the post is that it's highly leveraged. Not only do the party's representation in the legislature bear no resemblance to their respective shares of the popular vote, but tiny swings in the vote lead to exponentially larger swings in electoral outcomes. A 2% swing in the popular vote means 60 seats in the House. Finding and mobilizing those votes, the swing voters, is thus a matter of huge consequence to the parties. But of course, these are the voters paying the least attention, the ones who, to borrow Susan Delacourte's language, who make up their minds at the checkout counter. So we get long periods when no party takes any position at all for fear of alienating the swings, punctuated by wild frenzies of wedge issues. We call these elections. When a party needs only a small slice of the electorate to win, what is more, they have little incentive to make themselves less obnoxious to the rest. Indeed, they have every incentive to amp up the us and them rhetoric, the better to lock down their support. So some of the viciousness of our politics can be attributed to this perverse system. Is it any wonder that so few democratic countries still employ it? And please, if we get into the questions on this, nobody ask about Italy and Israel. That's the first thing people say when you talk about this. They don't mention Sweden or Germany or Norway. It's as if you wanted to indict first past the post by talking about Zimbabwe. But let's move on to more pressing matters, because unavoidably after the election comes Parliament. At which point most of us are moved to ask, what on earth was the point? For that matter, so do many MPs. That's how irrelevant Parliament has become. What do we expect, what do we elect MPs to do? Examine legislation? Not when dozens of laws of vastly differing purpose can be bundled together into omnibus bills, hundreds of pages long, the whole of the government's fall agenda in one bill, leaving scant hours to study any individual piece. Worse, the business of supply, the fundamental prerogative of parliaments going back to Simon de Montfort, has by many accounts broken down almost entirely, with MPs handed the estimates weeks before the budget on which they're supposedly based, each document on a different accounting system, the figures broken out in a way that makes no sense to anybody. Debate, the arguments are rote, attendance is sparse, no one's mind's been changed in a parliamentary debate in 60 years. That's when debate is even permitted, and not, as it happened 50 times already this session, curtailed by a government motion of time allocation. Vote? You know, time allocation is it's the politer term for closure. It's not closure, but it's kind of similar. Those of you who studied your history, the pipeline debate, one of the great fanatical debates of Canadian political history, everyone going to the Tong Wars, it was a fantastic 6-week debate. That was because the government had invoked closure in peacetime. People were absolutely floored. It was such an abuse of parliamentary democracy. Now it happens every other day, and nobody bats an eye. This is what happens. Voting in Parliament. Canada has, experts agree, among the strictest systems of party discipline in the democratic, or indeed non-democratic world, affording individual MPs the least leeway to vote as their conscience or their constituents dictate. Not for nothing are MPs sometimes referred to as $160,000 voting machines. Proposed legislation. In a typical year, only a handful of private members' bills pass into law. Not only must they survive the lottery, but votes on PMBs are increasingly whipped, contrary to parliamentary tradition. Indeed, as we were reminded last spring, MPs cannot even ask questions in the House or make routine members' statements. I'll repeat that, members' statements without the permission of the party whips. When they do, they're as often as not confined to reading out lines written for them by party communications staff. So that is an MP's lot. That's what the people we elect do. They do as they're told, they speak as they're told, they vote as they're told, they stand in their place when they're called upon, and they sit down after. They attack their opponents on cue and shout their support for the leader, often to the tune of a standing ovation. This is, I blame Joe Clark for this. It was under the Clark Conservatives that we replaced the fine old Canadian tradition of desk thumping with applause. And of course, the inevitable tendency is applause inflation. Mere applause did not become enough, and so now every time the leader burps, everyone jumps to the feet to give him a standing ovation. And if you don't think that looks like a third world tin pot dictatorship, Parliament is simply not the place where important matters are debated, decided, or even announced. It has become a largely ceremonial body, a glorified electoral college. How did it come to this? The answer lies not so much in the formal rules of the game as in the relative powers of the players. MPs are weak in the main because their leaders are too strong. Without redressing that imbalance, nothing will change. Simply allowing more free votes, for example, which is the kind of thing anybody who doesn't really want to reform the system always promises, would do little on its own, because free votes, as things stand, are never truly free. The date when party leaders began to get the upper hand can be marked with some precision. It traces back to the 1919 Liberal National Convention that chose Mackenzie King as its leader. Previously, party leaders in Canada had been chosen as they are in the classic Westminster model, still in force in Australia, for example, by a vote of the caucus. As they were made, so they could be unmade. In such a system, even prime ministers can be removed by caucus at any time, as Margaret Thatcher was, as Australia's Kevin Rudd was, and as his successor Julia Gillard was in her term. It's not hard to see how this would make a party leader more attentive to the concerns of ordinary MPs. By contrast, a leader in a possession of the mandate from heaven from the membership is free to thumb his nose at the caucus for long periods at a stretch. In extraordinary cases, after much acrimony and inertia, a leader can still be forced out by his MPs, effectively, but the knowledge that this would precipitate not a quick sounding of caucus, but a months-long leadership race makes this the atom bomb of political maneuvers, so awful as to be of little use. Whereas Thatcher was replaced in a matter of days. But that's only one side of the equation. If the leader dominates caucus, it's not only because they do not choose him, it's because he almost literally chooses them. In Canada, as a matter of law, no candidate may run for Parliament under a party banner without the signature of the leader on his nomination papers. This gives the leader an absolute veto over the nomination of every member of caucus, real or prospective, which means get out of line and you will never run again. Yet this is often defended, sometimes pathetically, by MPs themselves. How, they ask, how could a leader be expected to put up with a candidate who was damaging the party's brand? This is how fully they've absorbed the notion that MPs are, in effect, the leader's employees, like they've been caught pilfering from the till or something. It's always possible a riding association could nominate a candidate, I grant, so abhorrent to the party that it would have no choice but to withdraw its imprimatur. But why should that be the prerogative of one person? Why not a vote of the other riding associations? Even if MPs did not need the leader's signature on their nomination papers, they would, however, still have ample reason to follow his dictates. Ambition is the real party whip, commanding obedience where mere threats might not. This is especially true on the government side, given the range of favors and offices that are in the Prime Minister's power to bestow. The Prime Minister. In other countries, executive power is subject to various checks and balances, whether in the formalized separation of powers that an American president must negotiate or the multi-party coalitions that are the norm in most European countries. Nothing of the same limits a Canadian Prime Minister, certainly not one in possession of a majority. Prime Ministers in any Westminster system have always been powerful, but ours have amassed powers that are quite without parallel. As the political scientist Peter Russell said, it's like a presidential system without the Congress. So let's consider first the powers of appointments of a Canadian Prime Minister. He appoints the Governor General. He appoints the senators. He appoints every member of the Supreme Court and all the federal court judges too. He appoints the clerk of the Privy Council, every deputy minister, the governor of the Bank of Canada, the heads of all the major crown corporations, even the ambassadors. He appoints the chief of the RCMP, those independent officers of Parliament, the Auditor General, the Information, Privacy, and Ethics Commissioners. He appoints them too. And he makes almost all of these appointments without any independent oversight of any kind. True, it's customary to consult on some of them, and there are new tentative steps in the direction of parliamentary review of Supreme Court appointments. They might have been a little bit more disciplined with the current latest nominee. And they were even talking about someday, maybe possibly, popular election of senators. But the power to appoint them remains exclusively the purview of the Governor General in Council, which is to say, the Prime Minister. And most important, of course, he appoints the Cabinet. At 39 ministers, we have the largest cabinet in the democratic world, much larger than any comparable country. The President of the United States is able somehow to get by with a cabinet of just 15, plus 7 cabinet-level officers. This is to run the United States of America. The Prime Minister of Japan or the Chancellor of Germany, roughly the same. Britain, Australia, and New Zealand all have cabinets with fewer than 24 ministers. Why does Canada need nearly twice as many? It wasn't always thus. Sir John A. Macdonald governed with only 12, and as late as Louis Saint Laurent, there were still fewer than 20. What does it mean to have a cabinet of nearly 40? Well, you're given a typical majority governing caucus of between 160 and 180 MPs, bearing in mind a probability of some ministers stepping down or being replaced in the life of a government. It means an MP on the government side, if he keeps his nose clean, has at least a 1 in 4 chance of making it to cabinet. Compare that to Britain, where the odds are more like 1 in 20. And that's not counting the many parliamentary secretaries and committee chairs the Prime Minister appoints, all, well, as I say, within his exclusive purview. You know, in Britain, you have MPs who will never, ever get into cabinet, and they know it. So they get up to useful mischief. They become the dean of the House on some subject, or they chair a committee, or they just become a rebel of some kind, but they make a difference. They have self-respect. They're there for some reason other than to jump up and sit down when they're told. And that's just the start, of course, of the Prime Minister's exclusive powers. He alone decides when to dissolve Parliament, when to call fresh elections. In theory, the Governor General does, but we've seen how much that matters. Coupled with the power to declare any vote a matter of confidence, it effectively places a gun to the heads of any members on either side of the Commons who might be tempted to defeat a government bill. Mind you, if government MPs are powerless, they are Caesars compared to the opposition, who are charged, of course, with holding the government to account. Although, you know, it used to be that even government MPs saw that as being their role. One of the quaint traditions that's fallen by the wayside in Canada is that lasted up until about World War II was that when you were appointed to cabinet, even as a member of the governing caucus, you had to resign your seat and run in a by-election because your role had changed. You'd gone from being a watchdog on the government to a member of it, and you had to go back and ask your electors permission. Now, I'm not saying we should do this. It had certain practical difficulties. If you had a very narrow majority and you appointed a cabinet, you lost your majority. This is intimately involved if you've studied the King Byng affair. This is one of the problems they were facing. So I'm not saying we should go back, but boy, I like the spirit of it. But as I say, if you're an opposition member and you're trying to hold the government to account, have you watched question period? They can't get their questions answered even when they're answered. They can't get the documents they demand, as we saw in the F-35 matter, and when they do, they can't trust the figures in them, which is a remarkable statement in an advanced democracy. And on those rare occasions when a government is finally being held to account, when it really comes under close scrutiny, when its feet are finally being held to the fire, it prorogues for months at a time. Now, there's nothing wrong with prorogation in principle on its own. It's a perfectly legitimate parliamentary practice. But to do it when you're to escape scrutiny in that way is stretching, shall we say, the bonds of credulity and of practice and of convention and of decency. And having established the precedent, of course, in this direction, it immediately gets taken up by who else? Dalton McGuinty. And I'm sure we're going to see it in other provincial capitals as well. And again, even if you wanted to prorogue, why do you have to hide from Parliament for months after that? Why can't you prorogue and come back the next day? What we've now got in some provinces is legislatures that are sitting for less than 2 months of the year. This is a democracy? Does anyone care? Do they even notice? I don't know. Now, I know what you're thinking. There's still the confidence convention. Whatever else may have fallen by the wayside, a government must still command, in the end, the support of a majority parliament. This is the foundation stone of 9 centuries of parliamentary tradition. Well, tell it to Stephen Harper, who, as I say, prorogued rather than face a confidence vote he was sure to lose. Tell it to Paul Martin, who lost a confidence vote by many experts' appraisal in 2005, then spent the next 9 days trawling the opposition benches, offering jobs and other inducements he was not constitutionally empowered to bestow at that point in an attempt to win a do-over, which he eventually got. It's only a convention. Like ministerial responsibility, like cabinet solidarity, which we've just seen exploded yet again over the last couple of weeks. Denis Lebel coming out and saying, well, actually on this trivial matter of whether it takes 50% plus 1 or something more to break up the country, I, the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs in charge of this file, am actually going to break ranks with the government's position as enunciated in a court case. Why is he still in the cabinet? Because conventions no longer apply in this country. We just sail right through them. These conventions held effect for as long as governments felt like being bound for them, and as they no longer do, they don't. So to recap, a party in the grip of a single leader and his coterie of advisors, though it offers little in the way of a serious platform and differs hardly at all with its main opposition, is nevertheless able by a combination of false promises, venomous attack ads, and fortuitous media blunders to stampede a little over 1/3 of the electorate into supporting it, which when processed through the vote splits and other tricks of the first-past electoral system is magically transformed into a majority. Thus empowered, the Prime Minister rules with something approaching absolute powers until such time as he desires to repeat the process, ideally shortly after the opposition has exhausted its energies and its funds choosing another leader. And we wonder why 40% of the eligible voters don't turn out? We have, ladies and gentlemen, in my submission, something of a crisis on our hands, though we may not realize it. It's not only a crisis of legitimacy, but an existential crisis. With so few Canadians bothering to take part in national elections, it is debatable who the resulting parliament is answerable to or what it represents. The very notion of Canadians as a self-governing people is dissolving before our eyes. How can we fix this? I wish I could say we could. I have a number of suggestions, which I'll run down in quick succession since I'm probably running over time and since they're unlikely ever to be implemented. Let me deal first of all with the question of lying. I have suggested before what I call a Truth in Politics Act. Now, it's an odd thing that we accept in politics what we don't accept in large areas of private life, which is to say that people who we're doing business with will lie to us. We have all kinds of protections, truth in advertising acts, etc., to punish people who lie to us in private life. Similarly, politicians will punish each other if they lie about each other or to each other. There's legislation in the books in all 8 of the provinces, 8 of the 10 provinces, against lying about each other. But if they just want to lie to the public, that's perfectly all right. Now, I acknowledge that there are differences, and public life is not exactly like private life. Nobody trails around after every corporate CEO and catches them in any slip of the lip that they make on the campaign trail that they're not on. So I don't want to have something punitive that's going to, as I say, be just a tool for gotcha. But remember what I said was the real issue isn't so much that the cheaters are prospering, it's that the honest politicians can't get people to believe them. So what if you had, again, there's parallels in private life, some means for politicians to willingly assume legal consequences if they materially mislead the public. If you issue a prospectus, you are bearing legal consequences. And similarly, if you swear out an affidavit or if you're a bonded courier, you're willingly accepted certain legal consequences if you don't behave the way you say you would. So couldn't we have a section of the Elections Act that a politician could invoke at their discretion. Let's say when you're releasing your platform, you'd say, I released my platform today under Article 9 or whatever of the Elections Act, and as I say, you would be willingly and freely assuming legal consequences if you are, in fact, materially misleading people. I know that sounds difficult to do, but we manage it in private life in similar circumstances. I think it's doable in this. And it, as I say, it would give people a chance to judge the bona fides of somebody when they're making these promises. On attack ads, I have a very simple solution. You've heard, of course, of the thing they do in the States where they have the guy come on at the end and say, you know, I'm John McCain and I approve this message. And it's not really worked. I think we need to go one step further. Make the candidates voice the ads. Can you imagine if, I'll say Stephen Harper, what the hell? If it had to be Stephen Harper who intoned in that menacing voice that they all practice, you know, Michael Ignatieff, he didn't come back for you. The election, those things would dry up in a minute. This is the game, right? As the leader kind of soars along on the high road, you know, my opponent is only worthy and I have only good things to say about him, and then he has his minions put the knife in. Connect the two, and I think it'd be much harder for them to get away with that. And I think you'd see, and it's perfectly respectful of freedom of speech. You can say anything you like. You just have to own it. And surely that's a principle we should all believe in. Thirdly, cut their funds. We spend way more than we need to on election campaigns. The political class has arranged for themselves the most unbelievably generous tax credit, 75% tax credit. You don't get anything like that if you're just, I don't know, curing cancer. They don't need it. There's never been a time in our history when it was cheaper to communicate with large numbers of people. Email apparently has been invented and has reached Canada. And yet we're spending more than we ever have in the past on political campaigns. What are we spending it on? We're spending it on stuff that hurts democracy. We're spending it on attack ads, and we're spending it on robocalls, and we're spending it on push polls, and we're spending it on a bunch of stuff that we don't need. The only reason any of them needs the money is because the other ones have the money, and they want to make sure, like in an arms race, that they don't run behind. Okay, fair enough. We're going to cut all of your budgets. There's no reason we couldn't run budgets, elections, on a fraction of what we're spending right now, and with much less coarsening of our political culture. Fourthly, let's fix the debates. I said, I think they can be very useful things, but not as they're currently designed. But what if we had a debate every week of a campaign in both official languages? Maybe you could alternate hours or whatever you want to do. What if, in fact, we organized political campaigns around a spine of these weekly debates? If they became the feature of our election campaigns rather than these ridiculous leaders' tours and photo ops that don't mean anything except providing metaphors for people like me. For if nothing else, it would give the media something better to do with their time. I said we can't help ourselves. We're never going to fix ourselves. I have nothing to propose as to how to make a better media. Except this, that if we had to do, if we had election coverage, I should say debate coverage, you know, and I'm not saying it would all be Pericles in Athens, but if we had debates to cover in the run-up to them and the aftermath of them, and they weren't these big prize fights where everyone's just completely caffeinated, but they're just a series of debates, and they wouldn't be as exciting, and they wouldn't get the enormous viewership, I grant. Although, you never know. If you watch the last Quebec election where they had, I believe, 4 debates, which is getting up there, they all had massive audiences because there was real stuff on the line, and people were paying attention. You know, people do step up when you give them a chance. And set the rules for these election debates in the election laws in advance. Those of you who are familiar with your John Rawls, behind a veil of ignorance, so that nobody knows where they're going to be in the election campaign, you know, years down the line, so they have an interest in striking a fair deal with each other, rather than these last-minute ad hoc negotiations. The last point on elections. This may be controversial. I see no reason why we should not view it as being a fundamental duty of citizenship to vote. That is to say, a mandatory vote. To me, it's a bit like jury duty. You owe your citizens, your fellow citizens, your counsel. You can spoil your ballot. You can say none of the above. You can squash your hamburger on it. You can do what you like with the ballot as a protest. The one thing you couldn't do is sit on your butt. I'm not saying it's a cure-all, and you have to do a bunch of other things to make it people's worth their while, but as part of that kind of nudging them along, I don't see anything wrong with it. It seems to work in Australia, and it would encourage people beyond the penalties or the you could offer positive incentives as well. I think what it really does is it just instills this idea that we're kind of in something together here, that we have collective responsibilities and we should take these seriously. I'll just say in passing, because again, I could do a whole speech on proportional representation. Let me say, I don't care which model it is. I mean, everyone has their preferences. You know, when PR nerds get in the room, it can get pretty hot and heavy with all the droop quotas and the Poisson distributions and things. But all I want is a system where every vote is counted equally, where every riding counts equally, where politicians have to go after every vote equally and not just target on these micro slices of the electorate. I don't want any more of this crazy winner-take-all system where if you just manage to get a 2% increase in the vote, you get a majority. You know, people, when you raise this in the context of, you know, of our parliamentary system, they say, well, we'll have endless minority parliaments. Yeah, but they wouldn't be the kinds of minority parliaments that we're used to, because we're in a system, as I say, that's so heavily leveraged that when we have minority parliaments, everybody's got their finger over the trigger. Maybe I'll go up in the polls today. Maybe I'll go up in the polls tomorrow. I better go. Let's go. Right? So you're constantly tripping the wire. If you know that you're only going to get a 2% increase in your seat count from a 2% swing, you've got no incentive to force an election. So you look at a country like Germany, for example, they've had fewer elections since the war than we have. What you get are not minority governments, you get majority governments that are actually majority governments. They just don't happen to be with one party. They're coalitions of parties. And if it can work in virtually every other country on earth, I think we could somehow manage it here. But let's get to Parliament, and just a few quick things to get us over that. Very simply, we need to abolish the requirement for the leader's signature on the nomination papers. We have to take away that hammer that the leader has over the caucus. We need to restore the right of the caucus to hire and fire the leader for the reasons I was outlining. I think what goes with that is we have to have much more real local democracy in the way that we nominate and choose candidates. You know, when I proposed this, and maybe some of you are thinking the same thing, is it doesn't sound very democratic. And if you think, this is how these things become kind of self-reinforcing, if you think that the real action in Canadian politics is outside Parliament, is everywhere else, it's going on campaigns and it's taking out ads and it's all those other things, then yeah, you're basically in a presidential system. And you want the leader to be, as the Liberals have done, not even chosen by the party at large, but by everybody. If you think Parliament matters, that this is the cockpit of democracy, that this is where our debates should be played out, that this is something that should be an intense focus of our national life, then the job of that leader is to lead the caucus and should be accountable to the caucus. So I don't think it's undemocratic, but I think to make it real for people and to take away that stench, if you will, of a bunch of people in a room choosing it, we need to have local candidates and MPs who are really accountable to their local riding associations and to their ridings. And if people see that as a reality, I think they're going to be much more willing to say, yes, that's my delegate. That's my representative choosing the leader. I'm okay with that. We need to cut the size of the cabinet. No need to go into that further. We need to limit confidence motions to those explicitly designated as such by the mover. We might even subject the power to dissolve or prorogue to a vote of the House, perhaps, as in the current UK experiment, some sort of supermajority. And again, if you want more detail on that, I recommend Mark Jarvis and Peter Coyne's book, Democratizing the Constitution, has a lot of very good detail on that. We need to give the Speaker more power. You know, in the British House of Commons, you can't just move closure and that's the end of it. The Speaker decides whether he takes up the motion. You can't just have the government deciding on its own in a somewhat self-interested way that debate has become dilatory. There's some kind of independent arbiter. That seems to me to be a useful addition to our canon. We've already seen the Speaker, I think, with a very nuanced ruling, suggesting that, in fact, he still has the power that the government was asserting he did not to recognize members in the House and to decide who would get up to be able to ask questions. But you saw that very few MPs have so far taken him up on it, which suggests to you it's not only the rules, it's the power dynamics, it's the ambitions of those members of Parliament that keeps them in line. But I think changing the rules is nevertheless part of the equation. But there's an obvious problem with all of these suggestions. They require the assent of the powers that be, that would be the Prime Minister, the power that be, to go forward. If Prime Ministers had any interest in limiting their own power, we would not be in the situation we're in. And likewise, the other party leaders. One of the rare points of agreement among them is that caucus should be seen and not heard. We saw that in the Mark Warroa debacle in the spring, where they basically ganged up on him. Were ordinary members to decide collectively that they were no longer willing to be treated in this demeaning way, however, I think they could force the issue. But that's how they've been conditioned to behave. Each incursion on their prerogatives has habituated them to accept the next. Those of an independent bent are unlikely to be selected as nominees in the first place, I'm afraid. If they do manage to make it through to Parliament, they face enormous pressure to be team players, pressure not only from the leader, but from fellow caucus members. But nevertheless, it's up to them. None of these reforms are possible if MPs themselves are not prepared to stand up for their rights. And yet, if ever a start were made, it would surely create the platform from which to argue for more. We could turn the vicious circle into a virtuous circle. Suppose if MPs of all parties were to band together and demand as a first step an end to the leader's veto over nominations. Could the party leaders really withstand this challenge? And thus liberated, would MPs not feel emboldened to call for further reforms? But no, actually, it's not up to them. It's up to us. Nothing will really change if we, the voters, don't pay attention, if we don't care. We've lived without a functioning Parliament for so long that it doesn't occur to us what we've lost or are losing. We have to look past the Parliament that is to the Parliament that could be. We have to see what a remarkable thing it is, this little playhouse where the life of the nation is acted out each day. And we have to understand that that's our house, and those MPs are us. No other body represents all of us rather than just some of us. And as such, no other body can perform quite the same function as Parliament. Without it, the government would have a monopoly on the people's business. There would be no mechanism for forcing other issues and ideas onto the national agenda, nor any means of representing the particular interests and concerns of the people of each riding. It is, at the same time, the only forum in this godforsaken country where all of our many regions and interests and identities are forced to reckon with each other, to balance their own needs against the rest. It's the only body to whom the government is constitutionally obliged to answer, not occasionally or at its pleasure, but every day. It's what enables us to hold the government to account, not just at election time, but all the time. If we understood this more fully, that they are us, that this is where we debate the issues of the debate, where we hold our government to account, where we decide what bills shall be passed, we would be less tolerant of seeing the people who represent us treated with such contempt, because it is we who are thereby insulted. Oh, but I've forgotten someone, haven't I? Yes, the media. If ever MPs are to be released from the irons of party discipline, we, the journalists, have to stop assisting their wardens. We have to stop running around as if the world were coming to an end every time an MP departs from the party line. The story there is not party divided. The story is MP does job. Who knows? Maybe one day that will no longer be considered news. If we are to save our democracy, we have to do more. We have to restore public faith in the political process. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. It is broke. Let's fix it. Thank you very much.
I'll let them know that
Oh, yeah, question. How's that for time? I'm fine.
Okay. So Andrew has kindly agreed to take a few questions. Could people go to a microphone so that we can, everybody in the room can hear? Is there a mic? Yeah. So,
Just shout.
okay. Yeah, pass something around. That'd be great. Yeah, it's a little.
1, 2. There we go.
Okay.
My name is Jerry Pashan, and I represent Canadians for Responsible Northern Development. Is it likely that on your list, could you include that perhaps the youth ought to be entitled to vote at the age of 16, as they're trying to do it in England? And secondly, is it likely that younger people can be encouraged to go voting? Technically speaking, they're not going out to vote. There's a very, very large percentage of them are not. So is there an encouragement, a carrot somehow you can talk about so that we have those? Because after all, it's their country they're going to be inherited. And we are old fuddle-duddles. We're not being able to handle it properly. But I think it is their future in their country more so than ours, because we're burned out, literally. So tell us your story.
I'm going to disappoint you. I don't favor lowering the age to 16. If anything, I think it should be raised. I'm thinking maybe 35. But I don't know. It seems to me, we have a definition of adulthood for a reason. If it's 16, why not 14? Why not 12? Why not 10? I just don't think I think that there's a well-established principle in our system of sort of an age of competence, and I don't see any reason to change it. So I'm sorry, I can't agree with that.
Hi.
Oh,
Hi.
yes.
Hi.
What was the second
You
question?
hear it? Nope. Is it on? Yeah.
Well, I'm not sorry. I'm not sure that it's hugely different from encouraging the rest of people to vote. People have to feel a sense of efficacy. They have to feel it's worth their while, and it certainly seems to be the case that younger people have lower turnouts than older people. That may be because they've been taught to believe there's other ways, and there are other ways to participate in politics than just voting, but they shouldn't be mutually exclusive. And I think it may just be that it's sort of fallen out of people's radar. I mean, it's just not the done thing anymore for large numbers of people. So I don't have a particular recipe for young people in particular, other than I'm glad to see that they're now apparently, at least in some provinces, teaching civics in the school. I can tell you, when I went through the system, we didn't know what it was. We didn't learn anything about our system of government. So, things are getting better in some ways.
Hi, my name is Lawrence. I'm glad you looked at your own navel tonight with respect to the media being
No, I meant
involved
all
in
the
this.
other media.
Yes, of course, of course. But one of the things that I've been noticing over the years is the fact that the reporters who are being sent off to these events to bear witness to what's happening are then asked for their opinion. And I really don't need the reporter's opinion. I need the facts, right? Yeah. And the other thing that goes along with that is that there's too many opportunities for the respondent to slip away from the question at hand. Repeatedly, they're asked very precise, concise questions, and yet the moderator or the whoever's in charge of the question allows them to slip away, as opposed to saying, no, come back here. Yeah. This is the question. Yeah. Answer the question. Answer the question. And I'm wondering why the media doesn't take a bolder step and say, excuse me, Mr. Harper, that's not the question.
Short answer, we're flawed human beings. But I think I wouldn't take that too far. I don't think we're there to play prosecutor and to tell them what to do. I think we're there to ask them questions. And what we should do is to ask questions where if they're not answering it, it's clear that they're not answering it. And we can follow it up a couple of times, but I don't think you can badger the witness. I think at some point, if the person just doesn't want to answer the question, that's their prerogative. It will, as long as it's registering to those watching that, okay, that question was not answered. But I don't think we can tie them down and force a branding iron on them. I think there's limits on that. I think the more difficult problem is when we try to play prosecutor, when we ask questions that aren't questions but are accusations. And they have long preambles, and they have multi-part question, thing. And the person who's being interviewed, if they have any skill at all, can select which part of the question they want to answer, as I'm doing now. and they can sort of tune it to their own, their own liking. If you've been watching Question Period to completely invalidate everything I've just been talking about for the last hour, there's actually been some good sessions that make you glad to be alive in the last little while. Why? Because at least one member has figured out if you ask a series of short, simple, open-ended questions, then your prey, if he's worth hanging, will hang himself. You don't have to get up there. It's not about you. You don't have to get up there and quiver your jowls and point accusing fingers and long accusations, which just sail past. But if you just put all these questions on the record, then either they don't answer the questions, which becomes increasingly apparent, or they answer them, and you can build up a record and compare, what they said on one day with another, and it's really quite interesting to see how it's been tying the government up in knots on a seemingly simple matter. So I have a different answer, I think, than you were looking for, but I hope it's an answer.
Hey, so I'm 31, which means in Coyne's Canada, in 4 years, I'll be able to vote. I'm really excited about that, and I hope I live up to your expectations.
I may raise it again after that, so.
Just keep moving those goalposts.
As I get older, the age is going to go up.
I wanted to ask a simple question. Is the transcript for your lecture here going to be available in some electronic form publicly? Because I want it to go viral. I want to share this. I want everyone to read this because there are so many of my friends who aren't here. And granted, a lot of them aren't here because Slayer's in town, and that's fair. That's totally fair. But this is something that we need to hear, and it needs to get out there. And you've said so many things here that I think everyone needs to know, and that they're not aware of because it's just a given now. It's expected.
If I may wear my media hat for a second, how can we monetize this?
AdSense, man. AdSense.
It seems
just
like it seems like you're just giving it away.
This talk will be on the Faculty of Law's YouTube page, and you can get to that via our main page on our website. So we'll get it out there and onto Facebook and Twitter as well.
Is it on, I guess? I sort of got two questions, Andrew. I know you're a man of the right, and happy to have you here. You must feel at home. But are you objecting to the commodification of politics on some moral ground? Market forces seem to be working in every other area. I did read your comments on the throne speech, and you said, yeah, Harper's gone for the consumer demographic. And I think we all understand things are heading that way. So on what principles are you really objecting to this sort of commodification of politics?
Well,
first question. Second question, if I can get it out.
Wait a minute.
I want to give you time to think. And this second one's real simple. Did things change when Harper shut down the media scrums outside Parliament? That's my second one anyway. But I'm more interested in the first answer.
First of all, as they say in Parliament, I reject the premise of your question. If forced to define my political philosophy, I would say I am a liberal, conservative, libertarian socialist. And I mean every word of that because I don't understand why people just want to say they're one thing. It seems to me each of the traditions has something to teach us. If a liberal is somebody who says that we can reform our institutions that need reforming, I think we should reform institutions that need reforming. If a conservative wants to preserve institutions of value that have proved their worth over time, I think we should preserve institutions of value that have proved their worth over time. I mean, I don't get why you just want to slice off one. I know that other people will pigeonhole you, and I get pigeonholed all the time, although if you go on Twitter, as many people are convinced that I'm a shill for the Liberals as a shill for the NDP or a shill for the Conservatives. So I get why other people will pigeonhole. I don't know why people want to pigeonhole themselves. So that's a parenthetical. Since you asked two questions, I'm going to give three answers. I don't think I object to. I don't know what the commodification of politics means. I know that this line is a great applause line about how we don't want to be consumers, we want to be citizens. I just don't buy it. I just think it's humbug. We can be both. There are things that are appropriately done through the state, through collective decision making, that can't be done through the market. Great. Let's have a really democratic process for deciding those kinds of issues. But we don't have referendums on whether we're going to drink Coke or Pepsi. There are some things that are appropriately left to individual decisions in the marketplace. And we can differ about where those things are, but to kind of sort of trump the debate by saying that anytime you're invoking the consumer interest, that's somehow polluting the political world, I don't buy it. I just think keep each of them to their proper spheres. What I would say is part of the reason why people like me will argue for doing things through markets rather than through collective processes where appropriate is that, you know, the consumer tends to get treated a whole lot better than the citizen. That if you're a citizen model of, let's say, delivering the mail, then if your mail doesn't get delivered, you get to go and complain to your MP, who may or may not bring it up with the relevant department, who may or may not get to the post office to ask about it, who may or may not do anything about it because they're a monopoly. Whereas if you have a competitive mail delivery system and you don't get your mail delivered, you go to the next delivery. You go to the next customer, the next company. You have choice rather than voice. And choice, 9 times out of 10, trumps voice. So yeah, I'm a consumer advocate on those things that are appropriately done through the marketplace, and I'm a democratic citizen advocate in those things that are appropriately done through collective mechanisms. And the last thing was about that convention. It was just a weird event. I've covered a lot of conventions. I've never seen one where not only could you not go in and mingle with the delegates except in sort of approved little corridors, dimly lit, but you couldn't even go in the foyer. There was these whole sections of the building that were kind of like this gated community. And you could kind of look in the window and you could see the delegates milling about. But if you couldn't stand there for long because somebody would come along and push you away. It was just bananas. And of course, you'd still manage to talk to delegates from time to time. So if the point was not to permit that, it didn't succeed. But I think the point was just to stick a thumb in our eye. And it was just to make the media mad so that then when we would react and then they could show the delegates, look, the media's against you. That's just sad. That's not a way for a national democratic party to carry on. And of course, when you did talk to delegates, you found that they were fine, decent, public-spirited people who want the best for their country, who were meeting to discuss what were the best policies for their party to pursue. It was completely admirable. And it would have been a lovely thing to be able to show people. This is what democracy looks like, and have that as a positive statement rather than a negative statement. So it was a shame.
Two more questions.
Is this on? Yeah. Hi, my name is Nita Yalkinen. I wanted to ask you, Andrew, have you given any thought to the advantages or maybe pitfalls to electronic online voting, not exclusively, but as another option to increase voter turnout?
I'm a reluctant, dragging by the fingernails possible convert to it. I don't like it as a kind of a knee-jerk response because I think there's something honorable, and I'm just going to sound like an old fuddy-duddy, but I like the idea of going and mingling with your fellow citizens at the polling station, and that there's a solemnity to that. It's a little bit, you know, there's a wonderful Chesterton essay about when he served as a jury member, and the sense of awe he said he felt as he walked into the courtroom and he saw all the wood paneling and the lawyers in their robes, and that because he was an amateur, because he was new to it, he had the properly respectful and reverential view of it, rather than, as lawyers will sometimes do, they get a little bit jaded because they're dealing with it every day. So I fear that you know, and somebody said, you know, there's a difference between, you know, going to church in a church and watching church on TV. Again, you lose some of the solemnity of it. So that's my bias. But the more I say that, the more I find that's probably not a sufficient argument. I'll throw one more out, though, that there have been studies in places like Switzerland, which are different from us, I think, in the sense of community that they have, where apparently turnout goes down when you go to electronic because you don't have the peer pressure. You know, oh, morning, Mr. Smith, have you voted yet? You know, probably doesn't apply here. So I'm prepared to be brought round on this because if there's evidence to show that it'll help, you know, I'll have to get over my bias on that.
Last question over there.
Thank you so much for coming to Edmonton. I was just on my way out to my first country because I have double citizenship. I was just on my way out to Holland, but I may stay now because you gave me some hope. Right. But I have
Canada's gained, but Holland's lost.
But I have a deadly serious question. There was a time that I did not read your articles, too far on the right. And now I can hardly wait to what you are going to write the next day. Now today, and I have to get this, Abraham, give me the article. Today you wrote such a good article, and it was about the cult of leadership. And I don't want to go home until you have told me what is the future under the leadership that we have now that is total cult. I have studied cults and all kind of movements at this fantastic university, and there are total dangers. I want to use the word that you have not yet used. Is what you are saying in that cult of leadership, are we on the road to that word that starts with an F, fascism, and how can we stop it? Thank you.
No. I'll handle the alarmism here. I've pushed the envelope, I think, pretty far today. And I'm expecting to hear back from all kinds of people saying, you lunatic. I think we do want to be careful about not using extravagant terms like that. I have my differences with Stephen Harper, particularly on the way that he's handled democracy in Parliament, et cetera. But I don't think, A, that he would ever push it that far, or anybody I can conceive of in politics. I don't think, the sinews of our democracy may be weakened, but they're not weakened that far. That's never going to happen.
I'd now like to ask Adil Mullah, the president of the Law Students Association, to thank Mr. Coyne.
Good evening. Clearly, you can tell this is a big deal. The Leech Lecture Series is a big deal. You can tell by all the alumni here, the special guests, the faculty, and the students that this is a big deal here at the Faculty of Law. Why is it such a big deal to us and students alike? Because truth, democracy, fairness, these are all things that are very important to us. And it is our privilege to hear Mr. Coyne speak on these issues so passionately. It was great. I enjoyed myself thoroughly. And as such, we have a small token of appreciation for you. And thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you. That was good fun. That was good. Good. Well, we're not